Hello and welcome once again to WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm George Upper, editor-in-chief of the Western Journal. I'm joined today by crack reporter Michael Austin.
Yes.
Not to be mistaken with the Cracker Jack reporter. That's a completely different job title here at the Western Journal. Michael's our crack reporter. Michael recently did an interview and a sort of book review of a memoir, a new publication from our very special guest today, Eric Metaxas. You may be familiar with him from the way that I first became familiar with him, his excellent biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a book that, I don't know, perhaps is what he's most famous for, although he's famous for a lot of things now. Eric, it's so good to have you with us here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be famous for my books, but usually I let my fists do my talking for me. I put writing to the side.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad this is a video interview then, and it sounds like the studio interview could get dangerous.
Yeah, and so I loved getting the chance to write that review, and I do love the book, and I did read it in pretty much one sitting. I couldn't really put it down.
That is nuts. I cannot believe, really, as a writer, that is music to my ears. When somebody says I read it in one sitting, it's almost unbelievable. I think that means you did like it, and I feel like if a book reads that way, that's a success on at least on one level. So that you don't realize that means a lot. Thank you.
Well, and it's extra special because Michael pretty much only reads comic books. So the fact that he did that, that's saying something.
Yeah,
I'm grateful.
Yeah, and
sorry, I'm not making it easy on you today, am I, Michael?
One of the reasons why I took to it like that was because, opening up in the introduction and the opening, you kind of hint that we're going to get this spiritual experience at the end, and then you just start going through your life. And, at first I was just waiting. I was like, when is the shoe going to drop? When are we going to get to this? And then, after a few pages in or maybe a chapter in, I was like, oh, I just want to know more about this family. I just want to hear more funny stories about interactions between them.
The leprechaun was fantastic. I particularly love that story.
That's got to be my favorite. I mean, I'm not kidding. And I was there.
It's a great one.
It was incredible. Yeah.
And when I interviewed you about the book, you talked about how growing up in a home with two parents that were both immigrants was the most fundamentally formative part of my life. And I was just wondering, why exactly is that? What do you think, growing up in that household, how did that inform your identity growing up?
Well, I think the main thing is that when your parents have come from the other side, they know what it's like to suffer. I mean, they went through the war. That's the Second War. And they both knew hunger. It's unimaginable to us in America. And so they went through that. They both lost their fathers when they were 10. My dad did and my mother did. So they have real stories of hardship. And that's how they raised my brother and me, my brother John. That's reality. That was their reality 5 minutes before. And that's the world in which we grew up, in a sense. So it's a different world than the average American. And so when I was 9 and we moved to Connecticut, and I'm around all these American kids, because when I was in New York, I was in a Greek Orthodox, bubble. It was we went to parochial school, Greek Orthodox parochial school, Transfiguration Church of Transfiguration in Corona, Queens. But suddenly I was in Connecticut, and we went to public school, and I was in school with kids whose parents weren't from Greece or whatever, and I thought, wow, they have a different perspective. They don't really know suffering. They grew up in the 50s or in the 40s in America, and it was just not anything like what my parents went through. So my parents taught me to hate communism. They taught me to know that there's an evil in the world and that what we have in America, this freedom, is just not normal. it's wonderful. And they were thrilled to come here. And the cover of the book is my father at the Statue of Liberty, and it was taken by my mother. They were on a date in 1958. And I asked both of them to tell me their stories about passing the Statue of Liberty. And that's in my previous book, If You Can Keep It. But they both felt it was a really emotional experience. It really meant something to them. This is liberty. They're coming to America. So I grew up with that. And I think a lot of Americans, we can be naive about evil, about communism, about how bad things can get because we've had it so good here. But my parents raised me with a sense of what that was, of how bad things can be because they had suffered, and how good we have it in America and how we need to cherish it. So that's a big part of the immigrant experience for me.
Yeah, and you talked about how you saw the other kids and they just seemed to have such different lives than you. Did you feel like an outsider, or was there this underlying, I'm an American, I feel like I'm part of a larger community?
Well, I mean, the reason that the book is titled Fish Out of Water, there are two reasons. One is that I always felt like a fish out of water, not in some horrible traumatic sense, but I never quite felt like I fit in. When I was among the Greeks, because my mother was German, I never felt Greek enough because at home we spoke English. We didn't speak Greek like all the other kids. So I never felt like I was Greek enough. And being Greek among Greeks is a very high virtue. And so you kind of get that feeling like I'm not good enough because I'm not Greek enough, which is sort of funny, but it's as a kid you notice that. And then when I was around the American kids, my parents didn't know the same things that the American kids' parents did. So, we didn't have a dog, and we didn't, play baseball in the yard and all the stuff that American boys do. So there was always that feeling of being a little bit out of step. And that kind of goes through my life. I skipped a grade, so I was always the smallest kid in the class because I was younger and small to begin with. And so there's a lot of that. And then when I get to Yale, I don't fit in really because I'm a working class son of immigrants, and this is a new environment with sort of an elite cultural group that I had encountered for the first time. So that's kind of a theme for me. And then at the end of the book, I won't give away the punchline too much, but it becomes very meaningful. The fish out of water image becomes extremely meaningful and blows my mind and changes my life. And that is the climax of the book. And I wanted to end there. So it's right around my 25th birthday.
And then just one last question for me about, kind of your immigrant experience and just asking your thoughts on this one issue. I wrote a story a couple weeks back about the kind of the struggle in America today and how it's between some of us want a multicultural society and some of us are seeking cultural pluralism. The difference being, Democrats who want who want multiculturalism, they don't really think that we should all, meld together and have shared values. They're just basically saying like, yeah, we should all stay in our different sects. We should all have our different cultures and we should respect that and not intermingle as much. Whereas, the American ideal, what this country was basically built to do was to bring in all sorts of cultures and then come together with some basic shared values. And that's what it meant to be an American. And as a child of immigrants and someone that grew up in that household, do you think we're starting to lose that kind of shared American identity that used to make us so strong?
Michael, are you kidding? Yes. We're not starting. The answer is actually no. We're not starting to lose it.
Yeah.
We are well on our way toward losing it if we haven't lost it altogether. That's part of what I understood. And again, I wrote that in my previous book, or one of my previous books, If You Can Keep It. This idea that I understood that my parents were as American as George Washington.
Right.
When you share these values, you buy into these values, you love America, you love what this is. My father always taught me to love the fact that I'm Greek and Greeks have huge pride, but they're not living in Greece. They're living here because they want to live here. They love America. And, they wish Greece were more like America in a sense, right? That there are things about this country which are not meant only to be here. They're meant for the whole world. God doesn't want only Americans to be free and to have religious liberty. The whole world is meant to have that. And so we are meant to be a shining city on a hill, to quote Jesus, who was quoted by John Winthrop, who was quoted by a number of presidents, a shining city on a hill, so that people look at it and they say, I want that. That is wonderful. What is that? And what that is a culture of freedom that comes out of a respect for the Bible and a respect for the God of the Bible, and that is transmuted into a culture that is able to welcome every kind of culture and is able to celebrate other kinds of cultures, because it has this basis which has no bearing on ethnicity or religion. It is universal. And so there's the irony, is that if you really love America, you're loving a universal. You're loving something that doesn't say, we don't like other people. You're basically saying that I love America because America exists for other people. America has always been here to welcome other people, and people have come here and have embraced our values. When they come here and they don't embrace our values, which really began happening in the 60s and 70s, where we didn't require people to really become American. We just said, you just come here. That obviously is unhealthy. You can't have a culture that doesn't know what it is, that doesn't have a universal baseline that says this is what we all believe, these are our shared values. And so that's when things began to go very wrong. And so things have been going very wrong for 50 or so years. And I think that we're so far along that path that the real question is, can we find our way back? And that's part of why I do what what I write about and what I talk about, because we have to find our way back. It's our only hope. There's no way America can be America unless we find ourselves, unless we begin to understand what that means. And for 50 years, we've not been teaching that, and we've not been celebrating it. And if you don't celebrate it, you don't teach it, you don't preserve it, and it goes away. So,
it's interesting. It's we're sort of at a point of an American identity crisis, might be one way to describe it.
Absolutely.
One of the things I find so interesting in your book, Eric, is how you seem to have shifted, or not shifted, maybe is a better way to put it, among the various identities that you would use to describe yourself. Or at least I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you would. You are very clearly identified as the son of a Greek immigrant. You are very clearly identified as an American, even a patriot, if I can use that term. Certainly towards the your identity in as what can I call it, an intellectual, a Yaley, which I very much identify with. My fellow New Englander, my father, his brother both went to Brown, so there's a very Ivy League feel in my house. So I certainly get that. By the end of the book, and I don't, there may be a mild spoiler or two in here, but I don't want to give too much away. You're clearly identifying in a new way as a Christian and a believer. And that chapter in particular, the golden fish, I'm not going to say that I teared up reading that chapter, because I'm clearly too big and strong and manly for that. But I'm not going to say that I didn't tear up reading that chapter either. It's just a great story. One of the things I find so fascinating about that chapter and the epilogue are some of the things that you leave out. And so I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions along those lines. If you feel like we're going to get into spoiler territory, then we'll stop. I don't want to do that. But I think we can. I really want to ask you more about what's not in the book than what is in it. So I think we can avoid the whole spoiler problem. One of them, though, is you, of course, described this very powerful dream that you had around the time of your 25th birthday, which was, I think that was 1988. Which was the year I became a believer as well, so I found that interesting. What really struck me about your relating of that story is you have this dream, you wake up the next morning, and there's this certainty of a changed life, of a changed identity that you just seem to wake up in the morning with. You compared it, I think, to going to bed single and waking up married, I think was the phrase that you used. That certainty is fascinating to me, coming from a dream, coming from an unreal experience, if I can describe it that way. How would you explain that? Where did that certainty at immediately day one? Where did that come from?
Well, I think you have to say that the dream was not an unreal experience. It was as real. It was more real than reality. I mean, it was God speaking to me in the context of a dream, in the medium of a dream. But it was utterly real. There was no question in my mind that this was not just a dream. I mean, people talk about this kind of thing, and it doesn't happen to everybody, but I think I needed it to happen to me because I had sort of flirted with faith here and there, but I never really nailed it down. I was always just moving on to the next thing, and that's kind of my personality. But this was one of those moments where you cannot be the same afterward. I mean, it was... we have to understand too, God is it's not about a philosophy or a different way of thinking. I mean, that ties into it. But at the end of the day, if you have an actual exchange with God, if the Holy Spirit of God comes to live inside you, that's like saying I drank poison, or it's going to affect you powerfully. It's not a cerebral event. We're talking about heaven being real and heaven touching us palpably. I think sometimes people act like spirituality is it's this cerebral, ethereal thing, but it's as real as reality. It's more real than what we call reality. And I think that people need to understand God wants us to have that kind of an encounter with him. This is not about be a better person or, think differently. I mean, you will ideally be a better person and you will think differently, but it's not about that. It's about having an actual palpable encounter with God, not the idea of God, with God. That's an amazing thing. And, you can't work that up and you can't demand that God deliver now or whatever. But if your heart is open and you pray, God sometimes does these kinds of things. And in my life, he did it very dramatically in that dream. And I was in a tough spot. I needed that kind of an encounter, seriously. And we don't know why God does what he does, why he chooses to do this for that person and not for another person or whatever. And I have friends that have had tremendous experiences with God, and I'm covetous of that. And I have other friends that haven't at all. And so these are mysteries. So I can only kind of report on what I've experienced. But it was more real than getting married, because getting married, you already have a relationship with this person, and you go into it slowly. This was really like it was like being resurrected from death. It was like having a near-death experience. It was like being in an accident and barely surviving. Like you completely, it shakes everything. And so for me, it really was. It was a life-changing experience. It was not just something that happened and I kind of slowly changed. I mean, in some ways I was changed utterly instantly, but then the outworking of it took time. My political views and a lot of things, it took some time for me to kind of begin to figure things out.
So this may be a really quick question, I'm not sure, but one of the things that you don't talk about that I'm very curious about, you have this dream, you have this life-changing experience, you go back into work the next day or a few days later, I'm not sure, and you relay this to Ed Tuttle, who had been a friend of yours.
He's the guy who's been sharing his faith with me for the last year, yeah.
Yeah, and someone who was instrumental in this sort of phase in your life, and you tell him, this is what happened to me. You don't explain his reaction at all, and I'm very curious to know how did he react to that. Was he?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I don't remember. Otherwise, I would have put it in there. I assume that his reaction was mixed, because he's probably wondering, he says, well, what does this mean? Or what do you, and I said, it means, and I'll never forget, I never would have said this before this. I would have been embarrassed. But I said, it means I've accepted Jesus.
Right.
And that, how he took that at the moment, I don't know, because he may have thought, well, maybe you think you did, but did you? And I don't, like it took time for him to see that it was real, that it was very real. But we've been friends for these 30 plus years, so I can ask him.
Is he? He's starting to believe it's real now. Then hopefully, there's
he's finally caught on. He's finally caught on. Yeah,
that's good to hear. And then another thing I'm curious about, you basically sum up everything after 1988 in about a page of here's a bunch of things
that's
that
intentional.
are yeah
intentional.
Exactly. So I have two questions about that. One, I hope the answer to this is yes. Is that a hint that another book is coming that's going to describe some of these events in more detail?
Oh yeah, I mean, I meant it to be more than a hint. I mean, I think there's no doubt that I want to tell all those stories in another book, but you can't really. They won't mean the same thing unless you read this first. I had to tell this story to tell those other stories, and I didn't want to put it all in one gigantic book because I really think they are very separate kinds of stories. This is the story of somebody, in some ways lost, at some points totally lost, but at other points just kind of floundering and trying to figure things out. The subsequent book, which I will write, at some point in the next year or two, that will tell what happened after the miracles. I had all these miracles and crazy things happen because once you start walking with God, you can experience miracles, which I always thought, really, can that happen? And I've had a number of them. They're undeniable. I don't know how anybody can, people, when you tell those kinds of stories, people look at you and they shrug, and because they don't know what to make of it. Right. Because I think it's troubling, or they just think, well, okay, maybe that's true for you, and the whole point is, no, it's not true for me. It's true. If it's just true for me, it's not true for anybody. Right. So, but yeah, that'll be in another book. But this book, I mean, in many ways, I wrote this book for people who are on the same page as me theologically, people who are serious about God, to share with people who are not. In other words, I wrote this book for people who are not sure what they believe, or if life has meaning, or whether we can know life has meaning. I hope this book will find its way into the hands of those people, and usually it would be people like me who've had this profound experience, who they think of somebody who likes to read books that are reasonably well written and that are entertaining or interesting or whatever, and I hope that they will give this book to those people, and those people can kind of follow my journey, because I think that I tried to tell it in a way, in the moment, so that I am explaining that I was very skeptical, almost hostile to Christians, and the journey of that. And so I hope people who are currently hostile or skeptical will track with me, and will be able to follow the story. And again, I hope they will enjoy it. There's a lot in here, obviously. You guys know some of it. I mean, a lot of very funny stories, and that thrills me that I was able to tell what to me are hilarious, crazy stories. To put it in a book finally. Yeah,
it is a lot of fun. It's a meaningful book, but it's Fred Chappell, who's a poet who I've met him a few times, and was the former poet laureate of North Carolina, where I'm from. He wrote wonderful poetry, but he used to always say to people who he taught, and people who are studying poetry, to write poetry are often very full of poetry and the meaningfulness behind poetry, and Fred would always stop them and say, wait a minute, first of all, you have to entertain. Poetry is about entertaining people. It's about enjoyment, it's amusement, it's engagement, and the meaning doesn't matter if you can't get people to read it. I actually thought about that quote, was reminded of that quote in reading your memoir, because it does the same thing. It's engaging, it's entertaining, and you can almost read it just on that level. I hope nobody does, but you could. It's fun. It's a fun read. It's enjoyable. And I hope you get something more than that out of it, but you should at least get that out of it.
That thrills me again. I mean, that makes me happy, because I thought if I failed there, I've really failed. I want people to enjoy reading this. That's a huge part of why I wrote it, and so I'm glad that I fooled you. If I fooled you, maybe I'll fool a few other people.
The bar is low there, Eric. I'm easy to fool, but mission accomplished. Mission accomplished. So I think one last question for you. If I'm going to maybe impose on you just a little bit here, regarding, you used the word here just a moment ago, the miracles that happened in your life after 1988. And that's how you describe them in that very short sort of teaser, if I can call it that, for the next book. Mickey Spillane, one of my favorite writers, said the first chapter sells the book, the last chapter sells the next book. So I don't know if you've ever read that quote from Spillane, but I think you nailed it.
I've always wanted to be a hack writer like Mickey Spillane. Thank you so much.
He was totally a hack writer, and
any tips from Zane Grey?
Yeah,
that's so funny. That is so.
I am a over appreciative of hack writers. The people who can just kind of knock something out and make money at it and become sort of cultural icons like Mickey Spillane is kind of amazing to me. But I wondered if I could impose upon you. You use that word miraculous several times in that little section. They're all sort of teasing, if I can use that word. I'm wondering if you could just take maybe one of those and flesh it out just a little bit. Tell us maybe just a little bit more about why you would consider one of those miraculous.
I'm not kidding when I say I actually can, and that's the problem, is that every one of these is a real story. And if you don't get the whole story, it's useless. Now, the fact is that in my book Miracles, I tell a couple of these stories. So they're there in my book Miracles, and then on my website there are a couple of miracle stories which will find their way into this book. So there are 2 or 3 stories. There's one called The Christmas Cross. There's one, I think it's called Miracle in Amagansett, and then there's a third one. But I have them on my website under writing, I think, and they're there. But that's what's amazing, is that these are all like real stories. They really take time to explain it so that when you get to the punchline, so to speak, people get it. And it's the same with this book, Fish Out of Water. If I just told the ending, people would say, what the heck? There's no context. Sure. Do I trust this guy? Do I believe this guy? If you've read the whole book, you are tracking with me. You have a sense of who I am and who is speaking. And so when I tell the story of this dream, you have the context in which to see it, to process it. So that's what I find interesting. It's been my experience with the miraculous, is that for me, it's rarely, if ever, something that I can just say, hey, this happened or that happened. It's never like that. It's always kind of a little slightly complex story. So that's just a fact. Otherwise, I'd be very happy to. But I can't think of anything that I can just tell quickly.
Yeah, and that sentiment is true for the culminative moment of Fish Out of Water, because when I first read the dream sequence, like as I was reading it, I was flashing through kind of all the events that you laid out in the book, and if you just told that story without any of that context, it would be so much more hollow. Like people would not get.
Wait
what
a
it
minute,
took
even
to
more
get
hollow than it currently is?
No. No.
I got you, Michael. I got you. It would be even more hollow if you can imagine. You know how hollow it is now, right? Imagine it would be even more hollow.
Make it more hollow.
No, I know what you mean. Well, I think that's why I wrote the book. I mean, I just said I've got to tell these stories, and it actually became more. I was telling more stories, and so I ended up telling way more than I thought I would when I first started writing it. But I thought these are fun stories, and these are characters in my life that have meant so much to me. I mean, I tell my father's story and my mother's story, and it all comes together. And I just felt it's really important to know that, so that when you do get to the end, it kind of pays off. So, but I'm glad that you felt that way too, because that was my goal. I mean, I just thought you're never be able to get this dream the way I got it unless you hear my stories going up to it.
Yeah. So if you can't give us more on those, which I totally understand, how about this? Do you have a timeline in mind for when those stories are going to come out? If you have another book coming, do you have a plan for that yet? How long are you going to keep reading? That's what I want to know, Eric.
I've only launched this book this week.
Right, I know, but I'm impatient.
Copies, you know that if this book doesn't sell a ton of copies, the publisher will not want me to write a sequel. You understand how that works, right?
True. Yeah.
So if people love this book, then I will write the next one. Toot sweet. But I really do want to write the sequel. I've got another book that I probably need to write before that. But I do think that telling my experiences as a Christian, there's a lot of funny stories there too, like crazy funny stuff. So I look forward to that. So I don't know, probably it wouldn't be out for 2 years or something like that. But I hope that it wouldn't be longer than that. But as I say, if this book's not a success, it's definitely not going to happen. So I hope you've convinced a few people to buy copies. Fish Out of Water, Search for the Meaning of Life, available at fine tobacconists everywhere.
Well, and I think we can promise you at least 2 sales of the sequel. I think.
All right.
I think you've at least nailed that down.
Yeah.
No,
trust me when I tell you, I want to write that. And when I was getting to the ending of this book, I was champing at the bit, thinking, man, this is. I want to keep going, but I can't. I mean, this is already so long, and it's a natural place to end it. So, but I'm glad that I'm glad that I've whetted your appetite for the sequel, because that's more of an encouragement to me to write it.
Yeah, I know, and I truly, I know, not exaggerating. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to see the next installment, as it were. It is Fish Out of Water: Search for the Meaning of Life by Eric Metaxas. As we post this interview on YouTube and Facebook and elsewhere, we'll make sure we link to that. There you go. There's a nice, helpful graphic for you right now. I cannot recommend this book enough. It is.
Yes.
It's just, as I said, it's entertaining, a great read. It's fun. It also happens to be meaningful, and you can get some of that. You can get one of those pretty easily. There are plenty of places you can find one or the other of those. There aren't too many places where they are joined so artfully as they are here. So I really strongly recommend this book. So thank you, Eric, for writing it. Thank you for being here with us, sharing some of your story with us. I know that our viewers appreciate it. Even if they don't, I know Michael and I do. I had a really good time talking with you. So thank you for being here.
Well, seriously, thanks for having me, and thanks for appreciating the book. When you put something like this out there, you really don't know if people are going to get what you hope they get. And so it's just very encouraging. I'm thrilled you guys liked it, and that you found it entertaining, because that really was my goal. So I'm glad to get some good feedback.
Yeah, no, it's very much our pleasure both reading it and talking to you about it. We are coming up on that time. I want to remind everybody that WJ Live's here every day, Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern and 2 p.m. Pacific. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us, the audio version, just about wherever you listen to your audio podcasts. We remind you to subscribe to the WJ Live channel on YouTube at youtube.com/WJ Live. We're easy to find. Another good way to find us is to go to westernjournal.com/newsletters, westernjournal.com/newsletters. There are, I think, 4 or 5 different newsletters you can sign up for there. One of them is WJ Live, and we will email you a link to the episode every time it goes live, so you won't miss a single one. Again, thank you very much to our very special guest, author, intellectual, all-around good guy, Eric Metaxas. Glad to have you with us again, Eric, and actually would love to have you on again. Hopefully before you publish your next book. We'll find some other excuse to bring you on.
I have plenty of books coming out, a lot of stuff to talk about anytime. I do appreciate it. Thank you.
It's our pleasure. And thank you, viewers, for joining us once again. We'll see you next time on WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. Stay safe out there. We'll see you again soon.
Josh, did you hear? They're putting the Libertarian back on the podcast.
No.
Oh? You didn't see the calendar?
No.
You should talk to Kayla about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, who's on the show Tuesday?
You and Joe.
Yeah. Like he's back.
Yeah, no. You and Joe.
The
You should
Libertarian?
Yeah, Libertarian Joe.
He's not back.
You should just go in the studio and check it out.
You're messing with me.
Okay.
Okay. Nice joke, Kayla. Got me to go to the studio. No!